The rock was the size of a small continent. That was Warrant Officer Dara Osi's first coherent thought when the threat board lit up. Not fear, not the tactical cascade her training demanded, but the flat, animal recognition of scale. The object Sentinel-9 had, tagged as Hostile Asset Kappa 7, was 41 kilometers across at its widest point, its surface pocked with ancient craters and rimmed on the sunward face with a blue-white crust of frozen ammonia that caught the distant sun like a split lip. Someone had drilled 300 propulsion nodes into its polar cap and wired them to a single detonator signal. Someone had turned a moon into a bullet and aimed it at the ardent meridian. "Confirmation," said Lieutenant Bacale from the sensor station, his voice doing the careful, almost ceremonial flatness that everyone in the crew had learned to use when the numbers were bad. Object mass, approximately 7.2 times 10 to the 18th kilograms. Current delta, 4.3 kilometers per second and climbing. Projected intercept with ardent meridian, 41 minutes, 17 seconds. 41 minutes. Commander Isolde Varga stood at the center of the bridge and did not look at the screen. She already knew what was on it. She was looking at her crew. At Osi, running the kinetic intercept calculations with both hands moving across the console in fast, fluid arcs. At Chief Engineer Hamamoto 3 stations down, jaw set, already pulling schematics for the forward rail batteries. At young Ensign Creswell on comms, who was 19 years old and trying very hard to not let his hands shake. She had been 19 once and had been afraid of much smaller things, and she felt, briefly and privately, the particular tenderness of watching someone hold themselves together. "All stop," she said. "Action stations." The Ardent Meridian was not a warship. She was a colony carrier. 812 souls in her berths, plus crew, plus the irreplaceable cargo in her forward hold. Gene libraries, medical archives, engineering schematics, agricultural seed stock for a planet they had not yet reached. The consortium had named that planet Erova. They had been traveling toward it for 6 years. It hung somewhere ahead of them in the deep dark, a green and blue smear in the long-range telescope, too small to be real, too real to be a dream. Everyone on the Meridian had a photograph of it somewhere in a locker, tucked behind a badge, pressed flat inside a journal. They looked at it the way people had once looked at saints. The Vorath had been following them for 2 years. The first contact had been a cultural exchange attempt so clumsy it had nearly caused an incident. A Vorath diplomatic pod pulling alongside and broadcasting what their translation arrays had rendered as a formal greeting, but which turned out to be closer to "You are trapped vast space between stars, which belongs to no one, but which we have decided belongs to us." Commander Varga had responded politely. The Vorath had responded by destroying the Meridian trailing navigation buoy with a precision energy weapon. After that, the relationship had been clarified. The Vorath looked, at their most generous, like something a child might draw if the child had never been happy. They were long and pale, their joints bent backward at angles that read as broken, their communication style a dense overlay of bioluminescent skin pattern and subsonic vibration that the Meridian linguists were still only 70% confident they could read. They were ancient in a way humanity had not yet learned to be. Their ship, the Plenavar, was a black wedge 3 kilometers long that carried no visible propulsion system and made no noise that any of the Meridian's instruments could detect. They moved through space the way a thought moves through a mind, without apparent mechanism, without apology. Their commander, the entity the crew called Doppler because his translated title was something like "He who arrives before his own soundite had delivered his ultimatum 8 days ago." The Meridian would stand down and be escorted back to the inner system. Erova belonged to the Vorath. The Vorath had surveyed it 3 centuries ago. They had logged it, tagged it, and set it aside for future development, the way humans set food at the back of the refrigerator and forget it is there. The fact that humanity had spent 60 years and 9 missions and more money than several nations had ever possessed to get to this specific coordinate was, from Doppler's perspective, an interesting irrelevance. Commander Varga had told him, through 3 rounds of translation and 1 extremely tense silence, that they respectfully declined. Now there was a moon coming at them at 4.3 kilometers per second, and the Plenavar was somewhere in the gas cloud off the port bow where Sentinel-9 couldn't get a clean read, and OC was pulling up the intercept solutions on the main board, and all of them were red. Forward rail batteries, OC said, cannot achieve sufficient impact velocity to deviate the object's course. We'd need to fragment it. And fragmentation at this range produces a debris field that she stopped, restarted. A debris field that is not preferable. Not preferable, Hamamoto repeated very quietly from across the room. What about the Sakata? Ensign Creswell asked. He meant the escort frigate that had accompanied the Meridian since they'd cleared the outer belt. The Sakata was a proper warship, lean and fast, built for exactly this kind of situation. It had also been where the Vorath had started. Beckley pulled up the Sakata, last telemetry, disabled. Their propulsion is gone. Pilot's alive, running on emergency power. Who's the pilot? Lieutenant Navarro, sir. She's been transmitting for the last 4 hours, trying to get someone to respond. Varga had met Navarro once at the departure ceremony 6 years ago. A small woman in a crisp uniform who had shaken everyone's hand very seriously, as if she knew she might not see them again and wanted the handshake to mean something. Keep her channel open, she said. She gets to hear how this ends. OC was still running numbers. Varga watched her, watched the particular stillness that came over OC when she was working a problem she hadn't yet. Her lips moving slightly, her eyes not quite focused on the screen but on something behind it. OC had been a structural engineer before she'd cross-trained into tactical, she thought, in load-bearing terms, in stress and compression, and the ways force traveled through solid material. She was the best problem solver on the ship, and she was currently very, very quiet. Dara, Varga said, give me a minute. We have 40 minutes. Then give me a minute of those. Varga gave her the minute. She walked to the viewport instead and looked at the gas cloud, a violet and ochre smear across the stars, beautiful in the particular way that things are beautiful when they are trying to kill you. The Plenavar was in there, invisible, waiting. This was the other half of the plan. While the rock came in from ahead, the Plenavar was positioned to take them if they ran. The Vorath had done this before, she suspected. This was not improvisation. This was a technique. The thing about the Vorath that Varga had come to understand, slowly and with considerable respect, was that they were excellent at calculating the behavior of rational actors. They had built an empire on the assumption that sufficiently threatened creatures would make sufficiently predictable choices. They were old enough to have encountered most categories of response and to have built countermeasures for each. They did not fear species, as a rule. They catalogued them. What they had not catalogued, Varga suspected, was the specific texture of human pig-headedness. The exact quality of stubbornness that emerged when someone had been traveling for 6 years toward a dream and was not, on reflection, prepared to stop. Commander, OC's voice. I have something. Everyone looked at her. She had the kind of expression that meant the answer was technically correct, but she hadn't decided yet whether to believe it. The object has propulsion nodes on its polar cap, 300 of them networked. They're running a continuous burn, that's how it's accelerating. She pulled the schematic up on the main board. If we could reach the control signal, the carrier wave that's coordinating the node array, and insert a counter sequence, we could reverse the burn pattern on approximately a third of the nodes. That would generate enough asymmetric thrust to deflect the trajectory by. She did a quick calculation. Enough, just enough. Beckel was already shaking his head. The control signal is coming from inside the gas cloud, from the Plenavar. I know where it's coming from. We can't transmit through the cloud. The interference, we can't transmit through the cloud from here, OC said. We need someone inside it. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens in rooms where people understand what is being suggested and are processing whether they are the kind of people who will say yes. The Sakata, Varga said. She's disabled, but her comms array is intact. Lieutenant Navarro could relay a counter-sequence from inside the cloud directly at the control nodes. She'd need to be within 200 kilometers of the Planavar to get signal penetration. O.C. paused. She'd be broadcasting from inside the Voroth's defensive perimeter. At point-blank range, Ensign Creswell said very quietly, "They'll kill her." "Maybe," O.C. said. "Or maybe they'll be confused. We've never done this before. They might not have a protocol for it." Varga was already walking to the comms station. "Navarro," she said, "this is Commander Varga. Are you receiving?" A burst of static, then a voice, tired and precise, and not particularly frightened. "Commander, I've been trying to reach you for 4 hours. What took you so long? We're working on a plan. A good one? A beat, then tell me." Varga told her. There was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough that Creswell checked the channel twice to make sure it was still open. Then said, "Send me the counter-sequence. I'll need the carrier wave frequency and the node network architecture." "Ozzy is transmitting it now. Commander, the Planavar is going to light up the moment I start broadcasting." "I know. I mean, they will genuinely try to desakata." "I know. I just want to confirm that you know that." Varga thought about the handshake, the seriousness of it, the way Navarro had held eye contact a beat longer than was strictly necessary, as if she was making sure the moment was registered. "I know," she said. "You don't have to do this." The sound that came back might have been a laugh, or might have been the static. "Commander, I've been sitting in this can for 4 hours watching a moon try to eat your ship. At this point, I'm invested." Another pause. "Also, for the record, I don't think they've ever run into someone who'd try this. You might be right about the confusion. I hope so. Hope's good. Send me the sequence." The next 18 minutes were the longest of Varga's professional life, and she had once spent 6 hours adrift in a damaged suit with a failing oxygen recycler, so she had a benchmark. On the main board, the asteroid tracked toward them in red, a slow and patient line of math, indifferent to everything happening around it. In the gas cloud, Sentinel-9 was picking up the faint thermal signature of the Sakata moving carefully on maneuvering thrusters, conserving what was left of her power deeper into the violet murk. On the secondary board, OC was running real-time calculations on the deflection window, adjusting the counter-sequence based on updated telemetry. Talking under her breath in the low, continuous murmur she used when she was holding a very complicated thing in her head and was afraid to put it down. At minute 11, Hamamoto came up from engineering and stood beside Varga without saying anything. He was 63 years old, had been in space for 31 of those years, and his presence communicated, without words, that he had seen bad situations before and was prepared to continue experiencing them. Varga found this oddly steadying. "If this doesn't work," she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "It works or it doesn't," Hamamoto said. "We built the best sequence we could with what we had, that's the whole job. And if it doesn't..." He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then the colony logs survived the impact. They're in the armored core. Someone finds them eventually. He paused. "I keep thinking about what a rover looks like from the surface. The photographs don't give you the gravity, the air pressure, what it smells like. Ozzy says the spectroscopy suggests something like grass after rain. Petrichor," Hamamoto said. "That's what that smell is called. Petrichor." He said it like he was putting it somewhere safe. At minute 16, the Planavar fired. The energy weapon that struck the Sakata was not the precision instrument that had taken out the navigation buoy 2 years ago. It was something larger, an area denial discharge that lit up the gas cloud from inside, turning the violet murk briefly, brilliantly white, visible even through the viewport without magnification. Creswell made a sound that he turned into a cough. Beckler's hands went still over his console. "Navarro," Varga said. "Status, nothing, then." "Still here. Hull breach, decks 3 and 4. Sealed." A breath. "They missed the comm array." "I don't know how, but they missed it." Her voice was different now, the tiredness stripped away, something beneath it bright and focused. "Commander, I'm in position. I've got the carrier wave. Do you want me to send it?" Varga looked at the main board. The red line was 22 minutes from intersection. "Send it," she said. What happened next was, from a physical standpoint, simple. The counter-sequence OC had built propagated through the carrier wave, reached the network of propulsion nodes embedded in the asteroid's polar cap, and reversed the burn pattern on 107 of them. The resulting asymmetric thrust was not dramatic. It did not shove the asteroid sideways in any visible way, did not produce a light show, did not announce itself. It simply changed the math. Degree by degree, the red line on the threat board began to migrate, slowly, then less slowly, away from the ardent meridian's projected position. It took 9 minutes for the trajectory to exit the kill zone. OC was the first to notice, because she was the one watching for it. She didn't say anything at first. She checked the numbers twice, then a third time, and then she said, very quietly, "It's moving." And the control room understood what that meant before the words were fully out. And the sound that followed was something between a shout and a release of breath that had been held for 41 minutes. And Ensign Creswell, who was 19 years old, sat down on the deck because his knees had decided they were done. The Plenova fired twice more into the gas cloud, but the Txkata was already moving, limping on maneuvering thrusters, no more than 15% power but moving, and the shots went wide. Then the Plenova stopped firing. This was, in Varga's experience, the most interesting moment of the entire engagement. The Voth ship simply stopped. The firing ceased. The cloud continued its slow churn, and there was a silence on the Vorath communication frequency that was different in character from any of the silences that had preceded it. Varga recognized it after a moment. She had heard it in negotiating rooms. She had heard it from engineers reviewing a prototype that didn't behave as expected. She had heard it from doctors examining test results that contradicted the model. It was the silence of recalculation. Hamamoto had heard it too, he said very quietly so only she could hear. "They didn't have us in their catalog." "No," she said. When Doppler's translation finally came through, filtered through the Meridian's linguists, approximate and formal and strange, it was not a threat. It was a question. Their bioluminescent language, rendered imperfectly in text, said something that the linguists rendered as, "Why do you proceed when the calculation is against you?" It was not rhetorical. The Vorath wanted an actual answer. Commander Varga thought about it seriously, because it was a serious question and it deserved a serious answer. She thought about the gene libraries in the forward hold and the photographs pressed into journals and Hamamoto's word for rain smell and the handshake that had lasted a beat too long and 6 years of dark and the green smear in the telescope that had been a dream long enough that people had stopped calling it a dream and had started calling it a destination. She said to the linguist, "Tell them, because we decided to." It was not, she knew, an answer that would make sense to them. The Vorath had built their civilization on the logic of outcomes, on probability, on rational calculation, on the predictable behavior of threatened creatures. They understood force, and they understood strategy, and they understood the leverage of superior position. What they did not understand, what she suspected they had never had to understand, was the specific human capacity for choosing to continue in the presence of perfect information about the cost. The response when it came was another silence, and then a single phrase that the linguists rendered as, "We will observe you, not we will attack you, not we will stand down. We will observe you," as if they had encountered something worth studying. The Plenova pulled back, or perhaps simply became more invisible than it already was. Sentinel-9 lost the thermal signature within minutes. The gas cloud continued to drift. The asteroid, deflected by a hair on its polar cap, continued on its new trajectory into the middle dark, carrying its propulsion nodes like a monument to miscalculation. Varga was on the channel to the Sakata before the cheering had fully subsided. Navarro report alive. Ship is, well, functional is generous. Not actively on fire is more accurate. A pause. Commander, did it work? It worked. Another pause longer. I was going to ask how you were so sure I'd do it. I wasn't sure, Varga said. I hoped. That's a hell of a thing to run an operation on. We do it a lot, actually. The laughter from the other end of the channel was brief and real and slightly frayed at the edges. The way laughter is when fear has been very close. Varga let it settle before she continued. We're bringing you in. Keep your emergency beacon active. Hamamoto's already plotting the retrieval course. Copy that. A beat. Commander? What did they say? The Vorath. They said they're going to watch us. Silence from the Sakata. Then that's either very good or very bad. Yes, Varga agreed. I think so too. The retrieval took 4 hours. Hamamoto ran it personally, which was not strictly necessary and also completely in character. The Sakata came in on tow cables, her hull scorched and her deck plates buckled in 3 places, but her structural core intact and her pilot unhurt in the ways that mattered. Navarro came aboard through the emergency docking collar with a kit bag over her shoulder and a quality of ease about her that Varga had seen before, in people who had just used up a large amount of luck and were still processing whether to be grateful or indignant about it. They stood in the docking corridor for a moment, just the 2 of them, before the crew descended, and Navarro said, 6 years. You've been at this 6 years. Yes, and you're not stopping. No. Navarro looked at her for a moment with an expression that Varga couldn't quite read. Then she said, I'd like to see it, Irova, from the surface. You will, Varga said, and meant it in the way you mean things when you've just come very close to them becoming impossible. In the weeks that followed, as the ardent meridian resumed its course and the stars continued their slow rearrangement through the viewports, the crew did what crews do after close things. They talked too much, and then too little, and then just the right amount. Ensign Creswell wrote a letter to his parents that he would not be able to send for 4 years at lightspeed delay, and this seemed to comfort him. OC began working on a more robust version of the counter-sequence, refining the math, building in redundancies, as if she expected to need it again. Hamamoto requisitioned components for 3 repairs that the maintenance log said were not strictly urgent, and no one said anything about this, because everyone understood that busyness was a form of prayer. Twice in that period, Sentinel-9 picked up faint signatures that might have been the Plenavar far out on the periphery of its sensor range, long and dark and watching. Each time, Varga logged it without alerting the crew and sat with it privately for an hour before determining that the appropriate response was to continue at current heading. The Vorath were recalculating. She could feel it. The quality of attention behind those sensor ghost traces. The particular patience of a very old intelligence encountering something that did not fit its models. They had built a catalogue of species over centuries, and now they had a new entry to write, and she suspected they were taking their time with it. She hoped they were taking their time with it. On the 73rd day after the engagement, with Irova large enough in the long-range telescope that you could see the cloud cover shifting, Bekil reported the Plenavar had achieved a parallel course vector. Not hostile, not retreating. Parallel. Varga put it on the general broadcast. All berth, the full 812. This is Commander Varga, she said. For those of you watching the long-range feed, yes, that's what you think it is. The Vorath ship is still with us. She paused. They told us a few weeks back that they were going to watch us. I've been thinking about what that means. Another pause, the kind she used when she was saying something that she wanted to actually land. I think it means we surprised them. I think it means they saw something they hadn't seen before, and now they need to understand it. That's fair. We need to understand them too, and we've barely started. She looked through the viewport at the faint thread of light that was the Plenavar's heat trace. We're not at war. We're not at peace. We're at the beginning of something, and none of us know what it is, and that is, genuinely, the most human thing I can say about our situation. We are at the beginning of something, and we are going to find out what it is, together. She closed the channel and stood in the quiet bridge for a moment. Then she turned to the helm. Ahead standard, she said. The ardent meridian moved. Ahead of her, framed in the forward viewport, a rover grew. Slowly, the way real things grow, the way destinations become places, until the cloud cover was no longer a smear, but a system. Until the blue was oceans and the green was land, and the whole enormous improbable fact of it sat there in the dark and did not ask permission to be beautiful. Behind them, at a distance that might have been respectful and might have been strategic, the Vorath continued to watch. OC at the sensor station was running a new set of calculations, not for intercept, not for deflection, but something different, something she hadn't shown anyone yet. She was smiling at it in the specific way she smiled when she had found a solution that was better than the problem deserved. Hamamoto, in engineering, was humming something tuneless and old, the kind of melody that doesn't have a name because it was never written down, just passed from one generation of hands to the next. And Ensign Creswell, who was 19 years old and had sat down on the deck because his knees gave out, was standing at the viewport with his hands in his pockets and his chin up, watching the planet that was no longer just a photograph. They had come 6 years through the dark. They had turned a moon's own engines against it. They had said, "Because we decided to a civilization that had never heard an answer it couldn't calculate," and they had meant it, and they were still moving. The stars held their usual positions, patient, enormous, unbothered, and the ardent meridian kept going.